All right, we're back for Unit 4.4 notes, the atmosphere. And so let's go ahead and switch to slideshow and get started. Okay, so the Earth's atmosphere. Now, before we get started on this slide, you do not need to write everything down from this slide. I'm going to tell you what I think is most important, things that I have seen um, on the AP tests, maybe that you take for your unit test, but also the practice AP tests and FRQs. So you do need to know primarily what type of gases make up the atmosphere. So I would write down nitrogen and oxygen. Realize that this is like something that people don't know. Most people, if you ask them what's the most plentiful gas in the atmosphere, they would say oxygen, and that's not true. The most plentiful is nitrogen. So nitrogen is very important. It's important for plant growth after it is fixed by bacteria that live in the soil. And then oxygen, again, we know how we get oxygen, so you probably don't need to write anything down about that. We get that from photosynthesis. I would write down that nitrogen, because of that nitrogen cycle, is super important to have that much nitrogen in the atmosphere. Argon, that's not something you need to know. I would not write that down. CO2, obviously, we're adding a lot of CO2. It's one of the most important greenhouse gases. I would write that down. And too much CO2 in the atmosphere can lead to global warming. And so we have a lot of man made CO2 that is being emitted into the atmosphere and causing climate change. So I would write that down. There is water vapor. Water vapor, it kind of varies by region, but it can actually act like a temporary greenhouse gas, but it's not at all as concerning as CO2. I don't think you need to write that down. We all know that the water cycle has water in the atmosphere, and that's what causes precipitation. So I don't think you necessarily need to write that one down. There's other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. I think we know that we're adding greenhouse gases, and when we talk about Unit 7 later on, we're really next semester we're going to address all of those greenhouse gases. So I think you could probably skip that for now, unless you just want to write down other greenhouse gases. That's fine, other GHGs, and then ozone. I think that's something you should write down. This is ozone is O3. We're going to talk about it in much more detail in Unit 7, but I think it's good to know now. It absorbs harmful UV radiation. However, the ozone layer was damaged by us using something called a chlorofluorocarbon, or a CFC. And so I think that's important that you write that description down, that ozone is in the atmosphere. And again, we'll learn a lot more about ozone. We'll actually even talk about how ozone is formed. And we'll do a simulation in class, a little game sort of, that we play in class regarding ozone. So I feel like you'll know much more about it before the AP test, but that's probably what you need to know for now. Okay, so you do need to know the layers of the atmosphere and the characteristics that those layers have. And I'm going to tell you that you do not need to write all of this information down. You should know the order of the layers of the atmosphere, and you should know a couple of things about a couple of the layers, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so the very most outer layer will start kind of out in outer space, or merging with outer space, is the exosphere. So it's our outermost layer of our atmosphere. And that's where we fly satellites, like our cell phone satellites and things like that, are orbiting the Earth up there in the exosphere. And then we have the thermosphere. This is our hottest layer. So it's the temperature is the hottest there. When spaceships and things need to go through the atmosphere, when they cross into the thermosphere, it can be very dangerous for them. Anyway, so what you need to know about the thermosphere: it is the hottest layer. I would probably write that down. It also absorbs harmful X rays and UV radiation. It's where we see the aurora borealis. So I'd probably just write down those few things. You don't need to know how the aurora borealis forms, like is here in the notes. But I would write down that it absorbs harmful radiation from the sun. It's the hottest layer, and that's where the aurora borealis is. That'll help you remember the thermosphere. Mesosphere is the middle layer. It's the less dense area. You do not need to write that down. It is where we see, what do you call, shooting stars. That's where we see those. They get into the thermosphere, they burn up, and they move into the mesosphere, and that's where we see them. So that's mesosphere. You do not need to know anything other than that we have a mesosphere. The stratosphere. So this is one that you really need to know. It is the second layer of the atmosphere from Earth. So it's closest to us. It's our thickest layer of ozone is found here. That's what you need to know. It's the thickest layer of ozone. This is the layer that absorbs all of the harmful ultraviolet light from the sun. And if this gets through, because we as humans, like I said earlier, have been using CFCs, um, it, it creates less ozone in that layer. And then some of those UVB and UVC rays can get through, which cause cancer and can actually mutate the DNA in our cells. So that's very dangerous. And then the layer that is right next, like where we live, basically, is the troposphere. And so this is where our weather occurs. It's the most dense. These are things. What I'm kind of saying right now is what you need to know. The weather occurs here. It's the most dense. Most of the atmosphere's gas molecules are found here, and the ozone. There is some ozone found in the troposphere, which is extremely dangerous to us. So there's tropospheric ozone. That's bad. There's stratospheric ozone. That's actually good. So you should know the difference between the two. And this tropospheric ozone can form really bad smog, which is extremely harmful to us and can hurt people that have respiratory issues. Okay, all right, so that's what you need to know there. Then there's a temperature gradient. You do not need to know much about this. Basically, the layer of the Earth's atmospheres are based on where the temperature gradients change. That's how we determine those layers of the atmosphere. So that's probably important to know. I'm going to get rid of my picture here so that you can stop everything or see everything, all the words. What you really need to know is that the thermosphere is the hottest place on Earth. You do not need to memorize that temperature. The stratosphere is warmed by those UV rays that it captures. And then the troposphere, the temperature decreases as it gets further from the Earth's surface, which is warm. So the Earth's surface is warm. If you're up in an airplane, it gets very cold up there. During winter, sometimes they de-ice the wings because it gets even colder and can cause problems. But that's pretty much what you need to know about the temperature gradients. Nothing more. You don't have to memorize this chart or anything like that. Okay, that's it for Unit 4.4 or Section 4.4. So identify a layer of Earth from the diagram that has an inverse relationship between temperature and altitude. Describe why this occurs. And we just talked about that on the last slide. So you can check your answers on OneNote for that. I think that's all I have this time. I'll see you guys next time. 4.5, global wind patterns.